Bellular News, right? We've watched a few of his videos before. Gaming is a national security threat. The U.S. government is closing in. Oh boy. Oh boy. This one is going to be something. This is going to be a interesting thing for the U.S. government to go after. So let's get into it. Let's see.
Riot, Epic Games, and Supercell. What do those things all have in common? Well, they're all either owned or bankrolled by the biggest company in gaming, and that is Tencent. But now they've also got...
So this is about Tencent, because Tencent is a Chinese company. And they own a lot of gaming companies and pump a lot of money into these gaming companies. The most recent example of a game that I think came out with their funding, High Guard. Obviously, that did not work out for them, but my point remains. They got their hands on a lot of things.
Something else in common, and that is that the US government believes they may pose a national security risk thanks to the Tencent connection. And one solution being discussed right now is ripping Tencent out. And even if they
sorry, I did not mean to do that.
Security risk.
Meant to full screen here.
And that is that the US government believes they may pose a national security risk thanks to the Tencent connection. And one solution being discussed right now is ripping Tencent out of the US games industry altogether. Should that happen, well, suffice it to say, and as you'll learn in this video, it'll be goddamn messy. Tencent is the biggest gaming company that doesn't produce consoles, and they operate like a true empire.
Clearly, I do wonder how this would work out. Hold on, sorry. I'm all discombobulated right now. I do wonder how this would work out, like if the government does pass some kind of bill saying, or take some kind of action. I don't know if it would specifically be a bill, but some kind of action to break up Tencent and their, what is it called? They're like their hand on these companies and whatnot. Okay, but the problem with that is, right, a lot of these companies are getting funding from Tencent to make the games. It is a monopoly. It is 100%, right? But then who's going to step in and provide these companies again with that same amount of money to make these games, right? I think this will have a very big impact on the gaming industry as a whole. I think we'd also see a lot less games come out.
$140 billion invested across the globe.
That's
crazy.
That
doesn't even include full or near full ownership of Riot Games, Grinding Gear Games, Digital Extremes, Funcom, and Supercell. But even without control, they still have interests in Larian, Arrowhead, Remedy, Epic Games, From Software, Ubisoft, and many others.
Yeah, well, I mean, they had a hand in Ubisoft before everything that happened, but they just got more Ubisoft shares because of how Ubisoft has been performing and whatnot, and everybody knows Ubisoft is probably the worst AAA development studio out right now, like hands down.
For a second, League of Legends, Fortnite, Path of Exile, Clash of Clans, got to include the mobile gamers, and Helldivers too. Basically, if you played a major game over the last 5 years, Tencent has probably got money in the company that made that game.
Oh, yeah.
That is how deep today's story goes. So, Tencent's money is the backbone of this industry, providing investment in return, hopefully, for...
Holy crap, Valorant Mobile has become China's most successful mobile game launch year to date? That's insane. International games revenue hit $2.9 billion, up 43%. Holy crap.
Profit. But whenever a company gets that big, their relationship to their investments does change a little bit. And we've already seen how that can go wrong. Take as an example, Wildlight Entertainment. Tencent have so much invested that they're basically...
we'll have to look this up after chat. I do wonder if Wildlight has shut down. I know the game High Guard has shut down, but I don't know if the studio has shut down.
More interested in their wider balance sheet than they are keeping a game like High Guard alive. And the funny thing about High Guard is, well, it launched when it had to, not when they ideally would have liked to.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where, had that game have got a bit of a delay and a bit more time in the oven,
I'm telling y'all, I will continue to say this. If they launched the game in early access and then built the game for a year with community feedback, it would have been in a much better place. It really would have been. video gaming in Asia is like an epidemic, right? People literally die playing games from like blood clots and stuff. I do not know. I don't have specific information about that one, Canadian. I do not have. Oh, why is my chat not popping up? Sorry. I do not have specific information on that one. That is, I have not heard that. I do know that gaming in China is like restricted and whatnot, but I don't know about the blood clots thing. That one I haven't heard.
Maybe it wouldn't have had things like crippling performance issues on launch day. But
yeah,
what happened? Well,
the performance issues were horrible.
Was a true death blow to the studio. Now, imagine that happening to every company that wants to operate in the American market because the US government told them to divest. That is the stakes of this story. Now, a thing you might know is just how many Germans watch this channel, and I've loved being in Germany the few times I've been there. I'm planning to go to Europa Park soon.
This is the ad. I'm just gonna let it play.
To polish up my German. Less to be a fluent speaker, and more just to be functional. You know, ordering food, getting around, not standing there pointing at things looking like an absolute tourist. And that's where today's sponsor, Bellular, comes in.
Tourist?
Awesome, and they're an award-winning language app. And the bit that
I used to use this app actually, like back in high school for Spanish and whatnot.
Like textbook grammar stuff that you'll never use. And their courses are built by over 200 language experts. One of my favorite features is actually the AI conversation partner. It's one of the times where the AI bit actually does make sense because it means you can practice actual exchanges like ordering a particular item at a restaurant, asking for directions, and doing so in a way that can actually unfold as a conversation. That's really good for practice before you find yourself in that situation.
Dude, the few words that I learned in German were so hard to pronounce. Some are easier than others for sure, but they are hard words to pronounce.
Improve their proficiency.
This guy needs to charge his phone, bro.
To start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks, go to babbel.com/Bellular. And when you go there, you can get up to 55% off your subscription.
Wow.
55%. And
that's a good amount off there.
Are Tencent's interests in gaming a matter of national security? Should they be required to divest from any company with a large enough American player base? That's the argument that's playing out at the highest levels of the White House, according to the FT's sources. The way they lay it out is that Tencent has investments in Riot, Epic, and other companies like Supercell who have got massive American
Wait, what? Epic Games, the North Carolina-based creator of the hit title Fortnite? Epic Games is based in North Carolina? That's pretty interesting. I didn't know that. Medical research has documented 24 confirmed gaming-related deaths between 82 and 2026, the majority occurring in Asia. That's interesting.
Bases. And the question is whether data from those players could make its way out of the United States towards China, where the Chinese government or military could use that data.
So, okay, the only way, like the only portion of this that I could see being like a national security risk, right, is if Tencent is actually collecting the data on gamers. But then they have to sift through those what's it called? That data, right? And figure out, okay, does this person live next to like a military installation? Do they live on the military installation? What are they using to game? Or like, etc., right? That they have to sift through that information. And I'm not saying that it's not impossible, because it certainly is. But that is like how there's so many gamers here in America, right? That's going to take some time to really, pinpoint, because the military is only like 1% of the population. Yeah, in the US at least. And so now you have to find that 1% of that data of a even smaller amount of percentage of people that play video games, because not everyone in the US plays video games, and go through that. So I don't know how much of a national security risk it really is. I guess like what they could do is this would be like crazy, but the government could pass a bill saying like, you can't play video games in the barracks, on base, etc.,
Now, this would be things like your
that's the only thing I could think like that would stop that portion, because you won't be able to tell a service member that lives off base, or even civilians that live around a military installation, they can't play video games. Yeah, this is the same issue they had with TikTok.
Legends match history, your Epic Games account, your Clash of Clans spending habits. Apparently, that's an issue of national security. Though, being a bit more realistic, I would perhaps say that whenever you can, say, use some of the modern AIs and some of the modern techniques to analyze vast quantities of data, then even with a bunch of metadata and a bunch of maybe secondary or tertiary things to the thing that you're actually looking at, well, who knows? Maybe something like League of Legends match history could be important. What if someone in intelligence wanted to establish, say, pattern of life?
Okay, that I could see. I could see pattern of life. What's it called? I could see pattern of life, like if you work in like an intelligence thing or whatever, maybe. But even then, like it's still, like you still got to figure out that 1% of data that these people that are military members. And then, right, if you're looking for intelligence officers or intelligence personnel, that's an even smaller percentage of the military population, which is already a very small percentage of people. And I'm not saying it's not possible, because it obviously is, especially with AI and things like that, but it's going to be very time consuming. And the amount of information they might get, they'd probably find more information by like honeypotting or like messaging, like trying to reach out through a social media and like offering money, right? I think there's more effective ways that they could go about it. The amount of young military members that would take their life because of losing basic hobbies out of work would increase substantially. Oh, 100% it would.
Well, if you knew when someone was doing Clash of Clans on their phone or playing League of Legends, that would certainly be useful to you. And one of the FT sources suggested that Tencent had been trying to negotiate a way to ease these concerns since last summer. But now there is a meeting in April.
I will say, I always forget about mobile gaming because I'm not a mobile gamer myself, but I could definitely see, like, I think if you connect to like a Wi-Fi on the base or something, that would make it a lot easier as well, because obviously they're probably going to get all that data, like, oh, this IP address is coming from a military installation and they're playing in this building, et cetera, right? Then they could, okay, now I could see it. Then they could profile you, right? And then they could reach out in a different manner. Okay, I'm kind of seeing it now. I just had to think about it a little bit.
Between President Xi and President Trump. And this meeting is coming after the US president directed the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States to restrict Chinese investment in specific strategic sectors. They've already been looking at gaming for a long time, and this actually would not be the first games company to be caught up in these fears. So, let's talk about the version of this story that's already happened. Gives us some proof, a bit of a playbook of how this could play out. When the United States banned TikTok, it was the culmination of years of political maneuvering from both parties, and it was all supposedly driven by fears that US user data was being funneled out of the country to the Chinese government through parent company ByteDance. Now, when that happened, Marvel Snap went offline in the US, and that's because developer Second Dinner's publisher, Newverse, was a ByteDance subsidiary, meaning that Marvel Snap got caught in the crossfire. Now, they quickly found a new publisher for the US to avoid that sort of thing happening, and now we're seeing a similar set of concerns playing out with Tencent, just that they have much more direct involvement in gaming in the USA. Because in the TikTok story, Marvel Snap was just a little bit of collateral damage, but with this story, the games themselves would actually be the main event. So here's how it started off.
Dude, I wonder how much of the Steam catalog would just disappear. And this is why owning like physical media is extremely important too. Because, right, like let's say this happens and they are able to ban games that have any kind of like Chinese money flowing into it or whatever, right? Well, dude, you would lose out on so many games that just came out, right, within the past like 6 years or whatever. And because there's no physical copy of them put onto a disc, you're just kind of screwed.
The Committee on Foreign Investment had been investigating Tencent since the first Trump administration. Their specific fear is this. I'm just going to give you the direct quote. Tencent's investments in Epic and Riot would provide the Chinese company with access to the data of millions of Americans. So that is the concern laid out in their own words.
Okay.
Committee members from the likes of Defense and the Treasury continued to debate this stuff during the Biden administration, and by the end of that, Tencent was placed on a list of companies with connections to the Chinese military, a move that Tencent called a mistake.
I mean, I think what also is kind of biting Tencent in the butt is kind of like how the Chinese government is set up in general anyways, right? Because any company basically has to answer to the Chinese government and send data to them and whatnot because of how their country is set up. Doesn't the Chinese government have at least partial ownership of literally every company in China? Yeah, that's exactly. They have like some kind of involvement in every company. So that therefore the company has to share all of this data with the Chinese government.
They would say that, and maybe them calling it a mistake was a mistake, because it all seems to have lit a fire under the Committee for Foreign Investment in the United States last year. They really got cooking in this one, and now they're debating options for Tencent's future in America. And here's kind of what it could look like. Now, Tencent could keep their investments provided they're committed to certain data protections. And this actually is relevant to you in ways that are not properly discussed a lot of the time. You see, when TikTok was forced into a partnership with US companies, they committed to handling data under national laws. And in practice, it actually meant massive increases in data gathering that was managed by allies of the US government.
Yeah, and like some of the stuff that they're collecting on TikTok now is like they want your religion, they're collecting your address, etc. Like a bunch of crazy stuff. It's actually weird, dude.
So you could certainly argue there's also a domestic privacy concern as well. And while we're talking about
there
privacy,
is 100%.
Well, Tencent has a 10% investment in Discord that's worth $500 million. Your data is already in more hands than you may think.
Holy
and here's
crap.
the uncomfortable part. Neither option.
I forgot
really
they had
protects
Discord.
you. The data protection route gives the US government a window into these companies that could allow for types of surveillance you may not be comfortable with.
Yeah, so it's basically like it's two sides of the same coin, right? Chinese government wants it for like, data harvesting and to like, figure out stuff about the US and blah 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 blah. And then the US wants the data so that way they could track you. Who knows, probably in the future jail you because you said something that is deemed like, I don't know, racist, anti-Semitic, what else? Hate speech, whatever, right? Something that is deemed as bad talk, right? And then obviously for sure to sell you things because of Oracle and whatnot, whatever else, right? For sure they do. That's exactly how it would work out in the US. It's like it's either way, it's all messed up.
That's where I'd recommend you take a look at Anthropic's recent messaging and concerns over mass domestic surveillance.
Yep.
Some people, high up people, have.
Yeah, they're gonna start showing up. You're gonna tweet, I hate pancakes. Cops are gonna come to your door and be like, "Sir, what you tweeted today is illegal. We're taking you to jail." Kind of like what they're doing in the UK, right? Obviously, it's not that extreme, but if you speak out against like the UK government, they'll like take you to jail or something. I could be corrected on that, but as far as I'm aware, it's about if you talk about like the Muslims that are there in the country, or how the government is just kind of like letting everyone in, or whatever else, right? The cops will show up for your Facebook posts, tweets, etc., and arrest you, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Step down from OpenAI over similar concerns, so think for domestic US purposes, that's probably something you should be worried about, or at least think about if you're in the US. And even if they were to go the divestment route, that would still just change who holds your information. And either way, the person whose data it actually is does not get a say. Just so we're clear in the rules here. But here's what actually gives this one more teeth. Some within the Foreign Investment Committee believe that gaming companies hold more data than a social media app, and even hold data that is more relevant. These are, quote, financial information, personal details, and information in in-game chat logs.
I could definitely see that. Because the financial information, obviously, like if you put in your credit card or whatever, they also have to have your name, right? So then they're going to have your name. And then we all know how easy it is to just type in someone's name and find them on the internet. It's way too easy, to be honest. It's just ridiculous. And then like the chat logs could be like hit or miss. There might be a lot of racist slurs in there, poop talk, you know, smack talk, whatever. I don't really see like a lot of crazy information being exchanged in the in-game chat logs, personally.
So in that case, they could demand Tencent divest from any company that Tencent's currently got a stake in. But for 3 of the companies under scrutiny, there is actually a far larger problem. I'll start with Riot Games. They're wholly owned by Tencent. They're based in the US, so that is about as clear-cut a relationship as it gets. But Tencent only has a 28% stake in Epic Games. Significant, but not controlling. Meanwhile, there's Supercell. Supercell are fully owned, but they're based in Finland. Their US audience is enough for them to be considered a threat, though. So, regardless of operating region and regardless of the magnitude of Tencent's shareholding, if enough of a company's players operate in the US, then it's a potential risk. Now, with that in mind, think about the Tencent global gaming empire that we talked about.
Yeah, it's
and
massive.
How many game companies could be challenged if
it would actually leave like a massive hole if they had to divest, right? If they had to leave these companies in order for the games to exist in the American market.
They want to keep reaching their US audience. Even just saying those words doesn't feel like it communicates the sheer scale of what that would actually be. But that is the scale of what divestment would actually mean here. So, if we use ByteDance as an example, Tencent would be forced to sell their holdings to someone else. Now, first, that means finding someone to buy them. All those companies that we've talked about may just have to find partners to, fill in the financial holes that just appeared in their balance sheets. That is, of course, a lot of companies that would need to find new partners, often at major scales.
Well, if they do it how the TikTok deal worked out, right? It would definitely be some kind of deal with another billionaire, right? Larry Ellison, maybe Oracle would handle the data, which would be even crazier because he already handles so much data. And when the war popped off in Iran, he got more, what's it called? He acquired even more like stuff, basically. There's a whole video I watched about it. And he got a crazy deal, and now he has like access to a bunch of medical records and it's a whole mess what he has access to.
So let's actually put some numbers to this.
Well, his company Oracle.
According to Bloomberg, Tencent saw 43% growth in international games revenue last year. That's wild. $9 billion from a single quarter. Now imagine asking someone to buy out a company generating that kind of revenue. Then imagine dozens of studios all needing new investors at the same time in a market where barely anyone is making big acquisitions. It sounds a little bit like a fire sale to me. And what it would mean is that partnerships of necessity would be formed, rather than partnerships of choice. But hey, perhaps someone like the Saudi Public Investment Fund might take an interest in replacing Tencent. They certainly have the funding, and they would certainly not face issues with the US government in the same way.
I do wonder how that would be affected by what's happening in the war over there, or in the conflict, whatever they're calling it at this point. Because a lot of our Middle Eastern allies are very upset with how the U.S. is treating them right now. And they've even gotten to the point where they're considering not being allies with us and not hosting military installations in their countries. So I do wonder how that would work out. Because then the U.S. might get upset at them for investing in these companies and then still having access to all that American user data. So I don't know.
They remember the sorts of things they've been up to, the likes of Electronic Arts. So perhaps this would be the US government clearing a path for more acceptable funding partners to step in. But it does not stop there. Publishers and developers who partnered with Tencent to reach the Chinese market, which is, by the way, the only major games market that is still in growth, Well, they
That's
would now have
wild.
to find new partners before their long-term plans collapse. And then there's the other side. What happens to the companies Tencent doesn't divest from? Those who might lose access to the US market, or who would be required by Tencent to make up for any shortfall in revenue. Because Tencent have already been considering rebuilding their empire. That
Okay.
43% international growth that we mentioned, well, it came alongside layoffs at Funcom and many other
Oof.
studios. So we know they're willing to walk away from projects when they're a bad bet. How willing are they to take on the US government in years-long legal battles just to try to keep hold of some of these companies? It's all a bit spooky, isn't it? So you might be
I
wondering,
do wonder.
like, is there a chance any of this could actually happen? Well, sources suggest there is no clear indication of which way the White House will go on this issue. It could go either way, basically. If the data protection method goes ahead, then the US government will likely have itself a lovely new window into the activities of many of these companies and their users. That is
That's
not
wild.
particularly good for the average person who just doesn't like surveillance.
Yeah.
So that would be quite bad. But the other side of things, divestment. That could be devastating for the entire games industry, and devastating to the point where it would have systemic effects that would go way beyond just the Tencent impacted studios. And that
I don't think there's a win situation here unless Tencent wins in court, right? That would be like the only, I guess, positive that would come out, right? Or if they made a deal where they were able to like stop collecting the data or whatever, right? I don't know. I don't really see how it would be a win either way, because if they have to divest, it's going to leave a large hole, right? A lot of people will lose their jobs, etc., and we'll probably end up with more AI generated games, like assets, etc. And there's a whole community out there that does of gamers and people that do not want that and whatnot. And then if they don't divest and they just say, you know what, whatever, screw the U.S. government. Well, now a bunch of people are going to lose access to, their favorite games or whatever, which would also be crazy, and also create a gap or create job loss as well, because now those studios are going to shut down in the U.S., and that means more people aren't going to work. So it's just a lose-lose unless they can somehow strike a deal, and if Tencent wants to go, the legal battle with all the money that they got. So I don't know. I really don't know. This is gonna be a tough call here.
That's where it could matter more to you. If Tencent is forced out, then their games wouldn't just disappear. I mean,
they
Riot
wouldn't?
still makes League, Grinding Gear still makes Path of Exile, but the money behind them does kind of disappear. The studios that rely on Tencent's investment for their next project, their next expansion, maybe just for continued operation, they're suddenly going to be scrambling.
Yeah.
That means games would get cancelled, studios would close, and the ones that would survive would be bought up by whoever's willing to buy them.
Mm-hmm.
That maybe wouldn't be whoever is
and then the problem with that, right, like you're only going to have the big players be able to buy these companies, and if they want it to only be US based, well, that eliminates everyone else in the world. So now you only have like Microsoft, Sony, Ubisoft, EA, and well, no, not Activision. I mean, that's like really about it, right? Because I don't think EA is owned by someone. Well, they're owned by the Saudi government, so I don't know how that's going to work, or they're going to be. But the point remains, right? Like let's say Riot Games has to get sold. Who's going to buy it? Microsoft? Sony? And then what? Everything's just going to become more of a monopoly, because everything's going to be owned by only a handful of companies.
Best to buy them. I mean, we've seen what happens when the industry contracts. People lose their jobs, players lose their games. If Tencent refuse to play ball, or the US government simply keep moving the goalposts, how much of a knock-on effect does that have across the whole US market and the whole global market? Well, depending rather heavily on the meeting of the two presidents in April, we could...
I don't know. Maybe? I'm sure they did, but even now, like, Microsoft has a bunch of stuff. They own Bing, they own that, though it's not that popular. excuse me, they own Xbox, right? And then now they own Activision Blizzard. They own Candy Crush, or like whatever the company name is that owns Candy Crush King or something like that. Microsoft owns a lot. They own Minecraft. They own a lot of things. Sony also now owns a lot of stuff too. They own Bungie. They own I don't think they own Arrowhead Studios, but they are buying studios as well, Sony. So everything's just becoming a monopoly again.
Find out very soon indeed. And for a real working example of Tencent and an American games company and how it can all go wrong, look into the story of Wildlight and Highguard in this video next.
I do. So the thing is with Xbox makes up like 2% of Microsoft. So if Microsoft wanted to let Xbox go or just close it down today, they literally could. It would have like the smallest amount of impact on their business. It really would. It's actually ridiculously small how much Xbox generates for Microsoft. And I think that's why Microsoft doesn't really care about Xbox, because it just doesn't bring in a lot. If it brought in more or made up more of its overall like company worth, they would for sure care more about it. But they obviously don't. And they've already announced a bunch of stuff like how AI is going to integrate into like the Xbox interface and all this other stuff. And this comes, after the new CEO, came out to be like this AI lady that has no experience in gaming or anything like that. So I don't know, man. I don't know. Xbox does have a pretty loyal fan base. They do for sure. But they are definitely, what's it called? Not, treating them well, for sure. They definitely could be doing more for their consumer, but obviously, this is a megacorp, so they don't actually, care that much. But yeah.